Good morning. I would invite us to visualize that gospel reading. There are two processions going on in this story. We're Episcopalian. We love procession. Did you see the grand procession comes in, right? And maybe we got it from this gospel reading. I don't know. But there are two processions that I want you to visualize as the story it was unfolding. And we were told that Jesus had just came from healing a centurion's slave. I'll go back to that later. Okay? And they came to a town called Nain. Now, Nain in Hebrew actually means green pasture or lovely. Put that in your mind too. Green pasture. Green pasture. There's something symbolic about that name. So, as Jesus came to the gate, they saw a procession moving out of town, right? From town out. And they were carrying a dead man out who was the son of a widow. Okay? Now, why are they carrying him out of town? In those days, when you are a woman with no men in your household, you were nobody. Basically, your livelihood as a woman rely on men around the household. Okay, so the procession out of town for her is much more than just a funeral procession. Don't think, New Orleans with the jazz band playing, or the saints go marching in. Don't think that. It wasn't that kind of procession. It was a funeral for his son, also the end of this widow's livelihood. It's a one-way trip for her. She won't be able to come back as a widow with no men around her. Now, you might think, well, this happened 2,000 years ago. It doesn't happen today. Think again. My mother grew up in a village in China, and her sister and her mother, and my grandfather. My grandfather traveled quite a bit, and he died of an accident when my mother was 12. There was no men in my mother's household. Okay, pretty soon, their house was burned. They have no home to go to. Why? Because they think any women that cause all the men to die in their household and have no sons must be jinns. They are unclean in biblical terms. Okay? And therefore, they are to be ostracized, driven out, avoided, not to be touched, not to be related to. It's still happening today. It's not their fault. But our society, our culture, sets up these rules that ostracize people because of no fault of their own. And that is what that procession was about. It was a procession of death, not just for this man, but it was a death, an end of connection, a procession of rejection for this widow. That's one procession. The other procession, Jesus, with a crowd following him, if you notice in that reading, after he healed a centurion's slave. Now, we probably heard that story before, but this is a procession that is unlike the other one. It is countercultural. It doesn't go with what the culture says we should do. The culture says, we don't touch this jinx, this woman who killed all the men in her house. We got to drive her out. That's what society said. Society also said, well, you are your people. You don't you don't do anything with your enemy. A centurion was a soldier of the oppressing government that took over the Jewish community. Okay? Why would a Jewish prophet heal one of theirs? Okay? That's another kind of procession, a procession that is counter to what society said that we should do. And who cares about a slave? And yet in that story, and I encourage you to read that story, is that the Jewish community appreciated what the centurion has done for that community, and it was the Jewish community leaders who went to Jesus and say, could you help this person that who everybody said we shouldn't, do anything with him because he's our enemy. They're asking Jesus to cure his slave. And Jesus did that. And riding on that energy, there was a crowd, Jesus and the disciples, apostles, and his followers, with the crowd following Jesus. That was another procession heading toward this town called Nain, the green pasture. And there, at the gate, is the confrontation of the two processions. One led by death and rejection by what the culture said we should be doing. One led by Jesus, who come from a totally different place. A place of compassion. A place of counter to what our culture says we should do. Who is the person that we should relate to, and so on. And they clash at that point. Now, at that point, Jesus touched the beard, okay? Therefore, making himself unclean, okay? And then proceed to resurrect this man and handed him back to the mother. Therefore, going with the culture even, restoring the place of this woman in the green pasture. And I want you to imagine that as the two processions crashed at the gate, and Jesus did the healing. Which way is the procession going? Out or in? Who says out? Who says back into the green pasture? Raise your hands. Okay. So you got this two procession coming in, and Jesus' action says, no, this woman have a place. So does this man. Not only that, I got all of my people who will enter, into your green pasture. What are you going to do? And we just touch the centurion and heal his slave, heal your enemy. You're going to let us in? So what Jesus did was to say, hey, you might need to protect your green pasture. You might need to exclude those who think it's dangerous to what you have. You might actually block people from coming in whom you consider had things to do with the enemy. But no, Jesus said there's enough for everyone in the green pasture in Nain. There is enough. Jesus' procession is a procession of abundance, not scarcity. Abundance. And when we encounter Jesus with his procession, we're always turned around. We're always asked to do the opposite of what our instinct tells us we should do.